I see a question now come up more and more of younger people considering a career saying, should I learn to code now? I'm seeing what's happening with AI. Is it even worth learning to code? What do you say to young people asking that question?
It's a great question. I think in a few decades from now, I'm assuming coding will be an obsolete skill, maybe like a decade from now or so. I do
Mhm.
think that. That being said, I think the skills needed to do a job similar to development would evolve slightly, but not by a lot.
But look, we may as well jump into it, I guess. But thanks so much again. As I said, it's always, I love that I have some relationships that started in person and then one online, as opposed to everybody else in the world that I meet in person and they're surprised how tall I am. But thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. I thought it'd be great to hear, like I do with everyone. I think it'd be great for you to take us through your career and like what you see as the most important steps in your career and getting to where you are at the moment. Just to kind of start us off so that uh, we all know what you think were the major steps.
Yeah, for sure. So I can start with my quick background on like what I've done so far. Right now, I'm managing the engineering teams at Hydrolix. The engineering organization is about 50-ish people here, um, and that includes front end, back end, full stack, automation, um, uh, systems engineering, all of it. So it's about like 50-ish people. We are still hiring. So it's been interesting. I joined Hydrolix about 4 months back. I joined in June. Before that, I was at Splunk. I was leading the APM product team and around the time when I left, I was also leading the product identity team as well. I went to Splunk through startup acquisition. Signal Effects. I don't know if you are aware of the observability space. We were a unicorn acquisition by Splunk back in 2019. I used to be part of the core APM team that kind of built that product from ground up. So I've seen the whole journey of building a product, taking it to GA, scaling it, onboarding big customers, and then kind of going through the whole challenges of scaling, resiliency, performance, and kind of making it a full blown enterprise SaaS product that customers love. And I used to be an engineer back then. Before that, I was at Adobe. I was also an engineer there. So I used to be a backend um, API developer on the Adobe Analytics product, which was another enterprise SaaS product that Adobe has. So I feel like actually throughout my career journey so far, I've always been an enterprise B2B SaaS software world. And I've either been on the like acquisition side, being like acquired or joined right after acquisition.
Mhm.
Adobe Omniture was the acquisition that Adobe did back in, I think, 2012. And I joined in 2014. So we were kind of going through the woes of like post acquisition, starting to operate in the big cloud space as a big enterprise SaaS offering.
Yep.
So yeah, that's kind of a bit about me. Like, used to be a backend engineer, moved to management a few years back. And since then, yeah, worked in a bunch of startups, a bunch of different big companies. And yeah, it's been a mixed bag.
How big was Signal FX when you joined them?
I think it was about 200-ish people. I might have been like 210 or
Okay.
212, something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but yeah. Um,
So
almost.
I think all of us in the tech industry are often um, having the internal debate about large company versus small company. And so you've gone from a giant company at Adobe to like mid-size at Signal FX until it was big again and then really big at Splunk and now back to a startup. How, how have you decided when to change companies?
That's a very interesting question. So at Adobe, I was there for about 5 years. And that was kind of my first job out of school. And I feel like that's where I kind of learned a lot of the, core development practices and like the engineering mindset that I developed was sort of at Adobe. And I think at some point I started feeling that I wanted to kind of grow beyond the silos of the product and the team that I was on. And I really wanted to kind of understand how the business worked, how the requirements were coming in, what was getting prioritized, what was getting in through the pipeline. I wanted to get a more business sort of, view of was what was being done. And it's kind of funny. So I was debating whether I should go for an MBA or should I go join a startup. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll start with a startup. I'll see how things go. That'll give me better
I,
perspective on things. Uh,
I did the MBA. I think you made the right choice there.
the MBA question still haunts me, and I'll come back to it because I had the exact same decision paralysis when I was joining Hydrolix a little bit. So, so I joined Signal Effects, and then within a few months of me joining, I think it was 4 months or something, the acquisition happened. And then I was like, there goes the whole dream of working
Okay.
in a startup and, kind of learning the skills and staying close to the business. The good news was Splunk let us, they left us alone for a while. They let us operate like a startup within Splunk, with the Splunk funding. So that really made our lives easier. But I think the interesting challenge there was right after the acquisition pandemic hit. So that dramatically changed, the working situation and everything around us. And we were going GA right around when pandemic hit. I think we were going GA March 2020. So 2 weeks after the whole lockdown started in California. So that was kind of the decision making there that I was trying to decide between an MBA or a
Yeah.
startup. And then I went into management eventually at Splunk. I ended up managing teams. And then I was making around last year, I was kind of at a spot where I was like, I feel pretty comfortable in my role and I want to grow further. Should I think of an executive MBA now, or should I, go join another startup? And I kind of did that. And I made the choice of joining Hydrolix. Here, like I said, I'm head of engineering. So it's very interesting. It's challenging in a very unique and satisfying way where I feel like I'm
Yeah.
constantly dealing with newer things that stretch me, that help me grow. And that really push my boundaries in a very good manner. So I'm kind of learning a lot as I'm executing and implementing. And I think that's so far
Yeah.
been a good decision.
Look, personal opinion, but yeah, I think the MBAs are struggling to keep up with the economy and the real life, work today. They're just not heavy enough on the tech space, but that's my own personal bias. But talk to me about, I'd love to hear about management in Splunk versus management at Hydrolix. Have you had to change how you do things given the different scale of organizations?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like so Splunk already had a lot of the processes defined. It was a big working machinery, and I kind of was trying to ensure things are working as expected.
Mhm.
So I think the skills needed there were very different, and the role I was playing there was significantly different. And I think my scope has gone up a fair bunch now. And I think now I'm in a position where I'm setting up those processes at Hydrolix. So for instance,
Mhm.
when I came in, I kind of set up the whole process on how we were going to do release management, at what frequency, how are we going to do requirements gathering, what the roadmap is going to look like. And I'm working with my peers who are head of product, head of customer success, kind of working with them,
Mhm.
identifying the business needs, and you kind of, you make quick decisions, which is very different from the processes at Splunk because, at Splunk things are very
Yeah.
well defined and kind of have to go through the whole process to make any decision. And it things take time and rightfully so because,
Mhm.
they're operating at a very different scale. But yeah, so I feel like that was a big shift. Like the decision making is super quick and now I'm at the seat who's kind of setting up those processes
Yeah.
rather than being the person who's kind of coming in and ensuring those processes are working as designed.
Has it been difficult to adjust to um, the level of detail you need to get to, the level of people that you're working with? Like, has there been any shocks that you didn't see coming in making the transition?
Not necessarily shocks, but I guess, like I was saying, the pace at which decisions are made and the pace at which
Yeah.
execution happen, it's been honestly a pleasant surprise a little bit, because you
Yeah.
make decisions and you go execute them. You
Yeah.
don't have to kind of wait for the next, quarterly cycle or whatnot. And
Mhm.
I think that's been very refreshing, honestly. Yeah, in terms of hiring, in terms of growing people, in terms of anything, what tech stack we want to adopt, what features we want to build, what we want to ship, what the timelines are, everything is
Yeah.
super.
Yeah, no, look, I think I have, and for anyone that's considering the shift, there's positives and negatives, but one of the positives for sure is that in a smaller mid-sized company that's operating, if it's operating how it should, the group of people involved in the decision is so small, you just call them and make the decision and then go and do it. Whereas as you point out, if you're in a much larger organization, you can't run things that way or everyone would be
Yeah.
spreading in too many different directions.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the shift as well from engineer into management. Was that a conscious decision you made that you wanted to go into management? How did the opportunity come up?
Yeah. So I think it was a bit organic. I was always inclined to sort of a leadership role. But
Mhm.
then when I was at Splunk, like I was saying, I was part of the core EPM team that had kind of built a product from ground up. And it was sort of a function of the fact that I kind of really knew a lot about the product, the code base, the projects that were ongoing.
Mhm.
And it was very gradual in the sense we were hiring people, we were onboarding people. I started leading multiple projects. It got to a point where I wasn't actively coding anymore. I was just kind of, taking care of execution and management and like onboarding people and just like making sure that the team is delivering on the projects and like
Mhm.
aligning requirements, working with stakeholders and all of those things. Um, but it gradually kind of transitioned into sort of a management role. It was conscious effort though, in the sense like once I was put on that path, then there was a lot of skills that you have to learn. Skills around communication, on like how do you give feedback, how do you grow people, how do you grow teams. So I think that was very interesting. I remember one of my mentors, he kind of like posed me this question, what are your leadership principles going to be now that you're going to enter into a management track? And I think like those are the kind of things that I had to proactively think about. Um,
Mhm.
me- go through that journey of becoming a manager from an IC. Um,
And how, I think for the startup community, this is especially relevant. There's a lot of CTOs that have just kind of had to learn on the job, especially if they're younger and maybe their first management role was at their own startup or at a startup that they joined very early. And how did you learn? What are the techniques you use to get good at you said the people skills as opposed to, the technical skills?
yeah. Honestly, I feel like a lot of it happens on the job. As you run into situations, you kind of learn, how to be better at those the next time. Um, so I feel like doing is the best way to learning. Um, but with management, the tricky challenge is the risk is high and it's not limited to you. Like if a manager does a bad job, it's not them who directly gets impacted, it's the entire team. And also it doesn't show up right away. It would show up in a couple of months.
Yeah.
So I feel like which is why it's very important to be conscious, and be empathetic, um, above all with people and things around you. Uh, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think that's the reality for a lot of people is they have to. I mean, I think the being conscious and trying to work out what you could have improved was a big thing for me. And I think a lot of us have that experience where you think back to the early days of management and think, oh man, those poor people.
Yeah.
But if you're conscious about it, hopefully you get better over time and there's less and less of that.
Yeah. And I think like as you're conscious, so like looking back at my journey, I remember reading a lot of management books at help, reading
Mhm.
online blogs, listening to other leaders in the industry, talking to a lot of my mentors. Like as I would run into situations at work, I would talk to my
Mhm.
mentors. I would kind of like tell them, this is what I'm dealing with. If it would be like a performance issue or like, a conflict issue on the team, I would like proactively like go talk to people and kind of try to understand how to
Mhm.
tackle those people situations. And I think over time, it got better. There's also a lot of frameworks that are available that I've relied on, like especially like when you're trying to give feedback or you're trying to like coach
Mhm.
managers and whatnot. I think like there are a lot of frameworks you could follow that help you grow yourself and the team. Um, and yeah,
That's
like
a great
more
point. Yep.
recently, yeah. And like I've taken courses at Stanford on the side and like, like I would attend sessions and whatnot that help with that constant learning. But I think the like underlining point there is if you are intentional and conscious about like what you're doing, where your gaps are, and you are willing to put in the effort, I feel like there's a lot of ways to go about it.
No, look, I think that's an excellent point. It's a learnable skill.
Yeah.
Of course, some people are naturally better at it than others, but some people naturally speak code better than others,
Yeah.
so it's a learnable skill just like anything else. So I think something that you spoke a little bit about coaching there. I see a question now come up more and more of younger people considering a career saying, should I learn to code now? I'm seeing what's happening with AI. Is it even worth learning to code? What do you say to young people asking that question?
Um, it's a great question. Um, I guess I think in a few decades from now, I'm assuming coding will be an obsolete skill, maybe like a decade from now or so. I do
Mhm.
think that. That being said, I think the skills needed to do a job similar to development would evolve slightly, but not by a lot. So I think we would still need smart people who have a good understanding of distributed systems, of big data systems, who can, like run a lot of data analytics and whatnot. They might not have to explicitly go code, but they would have to have an understanding of the systems to be able to do well in sort of a software development job, whatever it's called in a few years from now.
Mhm.
And I think in order to do that, it's kind of important to understand the fundamentals. So I think there is still value in learning coding because it helps you understand those fundamentals where things are coming from. Um, Although that might not be a must-have skill in the future.
That's an interesting perspective. So you think the writing of the code might be going away, but
Yeah.
you think that people should learn to do it because they'll have to learn that to be able to build larger systems. Is that the correct understanding?
Pretty much. Like I think having that fundamental knowledge would help them be better at their job. So it's like, how like like learning math helps you
Mhm.
generally in life skills and like about
Yep.
I mean, like you use math everywhere, but you don't necessarily like sit and like solve the math problems that
Yep.
you when you were a kid. So I feel like it's
Yep.
sort of similar to that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Uh, we don't need to handwrite things out anymore, but you need to read and write. We don't need to pull out the calculator and do numbers to work in finance, but you
Yeah.
do need to understand how it all
Yes.
fits together.
Well, yeah.
And then the other controversial topic of this year, um, remote work. Are you all in person, all asynchronous remote in country, somewhere in the middle? How are you running your teams today?
I love that question. So we are a fully remote shop. Our engineering is fully spread out in America's time zone. So we have people all over US. We have a lot of our quality folks based out in Argentina, and we are looking into the talent in Latin America as well. So we are like fully spread out within the America's time zone. Um,
Mhm.
the the part that we are intentional about is ensuring that there is a good overlap between the teams in terms of time zones, which is why we've limited it to America's time zone. But it's fully remote, so you can be working from anywhere. Within US and its time zones, and like you're not expected to work a 9 to 5 sort of job. And outside of engineering, actually we are spread out across the globe, so we have people in Thailand, we have people in Singapore, we have people in India, like everywhere across the globe. um
And what do you find as the positives and negatives of that approach?
so I think the positives are, one, like it gives you a lot more flexibility. It helps us tap into talent from everywhere. Like you're not just limited to Bay Area or like, Pacific Northwest. And with that kind of flexibility, you can really tap into great talent everywhere. And um, the team, they have a lot more flexibility, right? Like as long as there is an overlap on the meeting times, there is like some kind of, dedicated time for meetings. They can kind of go about their day. You could have a regular life, where you can take care of your family, you can yeah, take care of your hobbies and whatnot, and still have um, a full time job that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily need you to be present 9 to 5. So I think that flexibility is super super nice. It's good to have. I love having it too. I can travel the world and I can still be like working and I can still be doing my thing.
And then I think one of the biggest mistakes that um, a lot of people that haven't tried remote before is they try and take their management approaches that were all in person and try and do exactly the same thing remote. Whereas normally people need to adapt something
Yeah.
to better run a remote team. If you had to give one tip to someone who was going to start managing a remote team and is new to it, what would you tell them to do?
That's a great question. So I think it's super important to define goals, to define milestones, and to set expectations. So, for instance, with my teams, I really try to align on what our monthly goals are, what our quarterly goals are, what features we're trying to build, what their timelines are, who the stakeholders are. So it's very important to ensure one, those requirements are very well defined. Um, the expectations are very well communicated and aligned on. The stakeholders are sort of always, sort of up to date on where the status of the project is. I feel like as long as you take care of these things, you can be pretty successful in a remote setup. Um, the other thing I think that remote setup, you need to be a bit cautious with the remote setup is because you're not meeting people in person. It doesn't give you a lot of opportunity to, build those relationships that really help you develop a good working relationship with your coworkers. And for that, we try to do like annual offsites. So recently in September, we flew the entire company out to Santa Barbara for a week. And that 1 week was, like a mix of meetings and mix of, like social hours, happy hours,
Yeah.
people playing games together just to, get to know each other. And I'm trying to like replicate the same model just for the engineering organization. So like giving each team some time to meet in person, to like get together and just talk about stuff. And I feel like that
Yeah.
really helps build the relationships that you don't in a remote setup.
And they're awesome tips. I love it. So I think, look, last question. If people want to get in touch with you somehow, what's the best way? LinkedIn, Twitter,
Yeah. LinkedIn is the best. Yeah. I'm super active on
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Thanks.
So yeah. Yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Put the link in the notes. Sakshi, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, for sure.